now we are happy to be welcoming Fern Halper, TDWI's Vice President and Senior Director of TDWI Research for Advanced Analytics. Fern is well known in the analytics community and has published hundreds of articles, research reports, speeches, and webinars on data mining and information technology during the past 20 years. Fern is also the co-author of several dummies books on cloud computing, the hybrid cloud, and big data. At TDWI, she focuses on advanced analytics, including predictive analytics, social media analysis, text analytics, cloud computing, and big data analytics approaches. She has been a partner at industry analyst firm Hurwitz and Associates and the lead analyst for Bell Labs. Her Ph.D. is from Texas A&M University. Welcome, Fern, and we're so happy to have you on this very first episode.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to be here.
Terrific. Now, I know I gave you a nice little intro there, but would you maybe just tap in a little further as to what it is that you do with TDWI and perhaps the team as well?
Yeah, sure. So Megan probably explained that TDWI, we're an education and research company. So I'm on the research side, and we have a team of industry analysts. So those are people who actually are experts in understanding what's happening in the market. And in the market, we mean in the data and analytics market. So we focus a lot of our efforts on understanding the technologies that are out there, the processes, and of course, the best practices for organizations to use when they're embarking on data and analytics efforts. And we do that via primary research and secondary research. And, we do a lot of assessments and we really get a feel for what's happening out there and what it takes to succeed.
Yeah, and I think you provide so much value for all those vendors that partner with us, but then literally any company that is in the midst of working on, scaling or whatever it is they might have on that data and analytics side. I think you provide a lot of value, and we're very excited that we're able to have you join for this very first episode. So today, what we are going to talk about is trends in modern data management and analytics. And I guess we can just jump right in if that's all right with you. What are the trends that you're seeing at TDWI around modernizing data and analytics? And, honestly, maybe a good starting point would be, what is it that you actually mean by this? Maybe we start there and then we can delve a little deeper.
Okay, sure. So when we talk about data management and analytics, so at TDWI, we define data management as the process of collecting, storing, securing, and using an organization's data. So you're collecting all of this data. How are you managing it? And then analytics is the process of analyzing that data to gain insights. And then not only just to gain insights, but if you get the insights, you want to take action on the insights because you want to get value, business value from it. So collecting the data, analyzing the data. In terms of some of the trends, so that makes sense to you?
It does. Yeah. That's very helpful. I'm learning along with everybody, by the way.
So way back when TDWI came to be, we've been around for 20 something years. We talked a lot about capturing and storing data in a database or a data warehouse, right? TDWI was originally called the Data Warehousing Institute. And so these data warehouses were typically on premises and they supported reporting. So typically organizations were capturing various kinds of data, structured data normally, like typical kind of data, and then they were reporting on that data. And before it actually got to the warehouse, it was going through all of these steps, it was being transformed heavily to meet the design requirements of the data warehouse and helping IT to build the reports. But, a lot has changed over the past 20 something years. And so, for instance, organizations are collecting new data types. So it isn't just about analyzing data from your billing system anymore. Organizations are looking at analyzing new kinds of data, so that could be structured data, or it could be clickstream data, when you click on your mouse on the computer, or machine generated data, from sensors that come from all kinds of sensors that are out there. It could be analyzing unstructured data like text data or image data or semi-structured data like in log files that you capture from applications. So, now there's a lot more data. That data is more diverse, and oftentimes it's also real-time data. And so what we see happening is that the traditional data warehouse isn't meeting the needs of the organization. And about 10 years ago or so, there was this concept of the data lake and a Hadoop data lake, which was a place to store all kinds of raw data, all of these new kinds of data that I was talking about. But even that has evolved now. I mean, now organizations are really, when they're talking about modernizing, they're talking about, say, moving to the cloud to be able to scale all of the amounts and types of data that the company needs for analysis. And they don't just want to now use a report or a dashboard. They're actually, so beyond trying to like sort of visually slice and dice and shake and bake data, that's what we would call it. Like in the past, they're actually trying to provide more sophisticated analytics like machine learning, where the computer is actually learning from examples to be able to predict an outcome. And some other trends, so machine learning is a trend that's been around. Obviously, machine learning's been around since the 90s. I remember doing it at Bell Labs, some of the original algorithms. But, organizations really want to do a lot more with machine learning, and that demand remains strong. They're moving to the cloud. It's already in the mainstream of adoption. Cloud data warehouses, cloud data lakes. In one of our recent surveys, there were more respondents using a data lake in the cloud than a data lake on premises, so they're doing that. Organizations are also looking to self-serve, so they're trying to democratize in some ways data and analytics, although it hasn't been as successful, I don't think, as some organizations want it to be, but that's a topic for another podcast. And, but, they're really trying not to rely on IT. They're trying to self-serve, their own data, provide tools to, do better analytics. You don't always have to ask IT or someone else, to build your dashboard or do your analysis for you. They're looking for more automated solutions because of the complexity of the data and the fact that there's so much of it, you can't just deal with it all manually. They're looking at modern pipelines, which is the way to get data from source to a target system, and automating that too. And, there's even the move to sort of unify the data warehouse and the data lake so that all kinds of data can be in one spot, which is sometimes called the data lake house, data cloud. I mean, it has all different names. So those are some of the trends. Of course, when we talk about modernization, it's a continuous journey. There's always the move to constantly evolve, but those are some of the trends that we're seeing.
Very interesting. I think one of the things that you mentioned was machine learning, and I think that's an intriguing topic. Would you mind maybe explaining a little bit more in depth on how machine learning works?
Sure. Yeah. So as I said, machine learning is becoming more and more popular for use in organizations. We see organizations sort of moving from, just visualizing and slicing and dicing to trying to be more proactive. And so what happens in machine learning is, well, first of all, there are like many different machine learning algorithms. It's just not like one thing. But the idea behind it is that the algorithm, whatever it is learning from examples. And so it's learning, and so that's why it's called machine learning, I guess. So there are supervised and unsupervised approaches. And in the supervised approach, there's basically usually a known outcome. They call it a target in machine learning, because of course everything has to be called something different to confuse it. So an outcome, like say an outcome, a business outcome might be if someone is going to churn or they're not going to churn. Like, if you're a service provider, they're going to leave your service and drop you, or they're going to stay with you, so that might be the target of interest that you want to train your algorithm on in a supervised approach. And one of the simplest ways to do that is to use a decision tree. That's one of the algorithms. It's a classification algorithm. So if I want to predict the characteristics of the customers who are going to churn, so I can try to reach out to those that have those characteristics and offer them something so maybe they won't leave my service, what I have is a bunch of examples of customers who churned and those who didn't churn. So I know those and I can train the algorithm on that. And I can train the algorithm using, all of the data that I've collected. So maybe some of that data, might be how much I spent with the company, how long I've been a customer. Some of the attributes might be more complicated, like might be some sort of derived variable. In machine learning parlance, that's called a feature. So you have targets and features. So don't just call it data, call it a feature, because I sort of derived it. So then you run it through the algorithm, and then, the decision tree, learns from those that did and those that didn't. And then it comes up with, some rules. It spits them out and it says, like customers who do X and who do Y, who have been with you for more than 10 years as a customer and spend this much money a month and do this and do that, then they have a 90% probability of not churning. And you get the idea, so the algorithm's actually training on the data. So, that's one example of a machine learning algorithm. As I said, there are a lot of them, but that gives you, I think, a good idea of how it actually works.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I also think that it seems like it would be very, very helpful to companies that have that much data coming in constantly, that need to be, analyzing what's happening and maybe trying to break down to become a little bit more efficient as well. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing at TDWI in the way of modernizing? I know you touched a little bit on that, but is there some more maybe that you'd like to mention on modernizing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I talked about, the move to the cloud and cloud data warehouses and that sort of thing. And it's not just a cloud stack. Another sort of big trend that we're seeing is this move towards a data fabric. So the reality of the situation is, you may have a cloud data warehouse, but that may not be the only platform that you're storing data in, right? There's lots of data. It could be on premises. It could be, in your cloud data warehouse. And so we see some organizations moving towards this idea of a data fabric, the idea of like stitching, like a fabric, stitching data together across environments. And there's different ways to do that with different technologies. One of them is data virtualization. I mentioned, this automation, this move to automation, and we were just talking about machine learning. So in the machine learning space, there's automated machine learning, auto ML, it's referred to. So in auto ML is supposed to be used for people who maybe aren't trained as data scientists or data scientists that want to do things, be more productive and do things easily. Like auto ML, actually, you give it the data and whatever else you need to give it, and then it's going to go through, pick the best machine learning model and build it for you. It'll build the features, it'll build the model. Of course, there's a lot more to machine learning than just feature engineering and building the model, but there's these auto ML types of tools. And we're seeing automation across the whole data and analytics lifecycle, everything from using machine learning infused in software to identify sensitive data. So if data is very sensitive, you can actually identify it, to classify data, to surface insights. I was talking about building machine learning models, but also just doing things like surfacing an insight from a bunch of data. We're seeing, that with all of this, a lot of organizations want to try to upskill their business analysts, the ones who are building the dashboards and the reports, to actually become data scientists. So that's another trend that we're seeing. And also, as part of this, is organizations are trying to get more value out of their data. They're hiring chief data officers or chief analytics officers, chief data and analytics officers. They're all sort of, part of that, to actually drive value from data. I mean, so those are some of the other trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, something that sounds interesting and potentially relatively hard on an individual basis is the idea of upskilling, taking a business analyst and turning them into a data scientist.
Yeah.
Are organizations finding that like very challenging, or is this something that might actually be easier than it sounds?
I think it's too early to know. when we survey organizations that are, the majority of companies, a lot of them say that they actually are trying to upskill. It's like a big priority. It was a big priority for 2022. But then when you ask them how it's going, or those that are starting to, they sort of say it's too early to know. I mean, like these auto ML tools are early to know. And one of the biggest things that organizations need to do is, to build a data literacy program if they're going to do something like this, because the modern analyst or the citizen data scientist, these upskilled people, they need to, if they have other obligations like building reports and dashboards, then if people aren't self-serving, then how are they going to find the time to actually do all the other new stuff? So there's a lot of cultural issues, there's skills issues, there's all sorts of issues that come into this upskilling. But, I do think, why isn't it possible? I mean, data analysts are critical thinkers, they have a lot of the skills that they would need. So it's certainly possible, and we do talk to some organizations that are doing this, and some of them will send, people to universities to get certificates, degrees. TDWI has data science boot camps to help people get started, on our education team offers that. So, certainly it's more than probable that can actually happen.
Yeah, I would assume that, if there's a will, there's a way kind of mentality would apply here, in the
Right.
sense that, if the individual is willing to make the shift and is interested in learning, then they get provided the resources to do so, there's no reason that they can't. So something else you mentioned was the idea of organizations bringing on a chief data officer. Are you seeing that happening more and more? You mentioned that, but why wasn't this something that was happening in the past? Why is it happening now?
I think that in the past, a lot of the data responsibilities fell to IT, but IT has a lot of other responsibilities too. Think of all of the systems you have running in your organization. And so, I think they're pulled in different directions. People realized that there was a lot of value to be had from data, and it made sense to hire someone who was, actually in charge of getting that value from data, so that's where this notion of the CDO came from. And I'd say in our surveys, about a third, maybe 25 to 30% of organizations seem to have one. And I think it's sort of the early days. I will say that those who have CDOs are more likely to measure top or bottom line impact. Like actually there is value from having a CDO if you let the CDO actually do their job and be patient, because anecdotally we often hear that CDOs are fired after like 6 or 9 months or something, and it may take more than 6 or 9 months,
Mm-hmm.
for them to do something that's providing a lot of value. So, it's a good role to have, but the CDO should be part of that C-suite. It's not like they should be hidden in the weeds, that if they're bringing the data and analytics perspective up to the C-suite, they sort of need to be in the C-suite, I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So in the interest of time here, I want to try and get to maybe two more questions from you. I know we can go for a long time. You have a wealth of knowledge in the area. But something that I wanted to ask, and I think something that'll be useful for the audience, is what are the challenges organizations face as they try to modernize?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mentioned, data literacy, and that's like a really big challenge. I mean, that involves how well users actually understand data, how they can interact with the data, and, how they communicate analytics results. It includes like understanding the business, critical thinking, communication skills. And I think, that's a big challenge, and culture in and of itself. So it's not necessarily just the technology or the data, even though obviously you need a solid data foundation to modernize, but a lot of it is around the culture. It's around training and skill sets, getting people to actually think, and make decisions based on data, and sort of get converse in data. So I think that that's a big deal. And another big deal is data governance, because that always comes up as the number one priority in our surveys. As the environment gets more complex, you have to worry about the policies processes you put in place, to make sure that the data is of high quality, it's compliant, it's trustworthy, all of that. And now you're doing it potentially across these environments. So, that becomes a challenge as well. Even when you're trying to unify your data into like a cloud stack or something, it seems like there's the cloud stack or there's this data fabric approach that I was talking about, but either one is going to require data governance, and you have new types of data. So how are you going to govern that? So, I mean, those are some of the challenges that organizations are facing. Aside, when you talk to IT people, they're going to say, our challenges are with some of its data integration, just like getting data into these new platforms and making it available, for analytics. And you talk to the analytics people and they say, well, we don't have good enough pipelines, to bring the data, and, we need to get at this data to analyze it. And we're having trouble actually, doing that. And, all of that is sort of part and parcel of the organizational culture and what can be done, because if you have the organization fighting against you, and they're not really into it, then it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of our audience members might be facing one or multiple of those challenges currently as they're going through this. So maybe a nice way to end this conversation would be about some best practices that TDWI would recommend for modernization.
Yeah, I think that the first one is to know why you're modernizing. What's the business reason for it? To make sure that you have a strategy, to make sure that people are on board, and have the right talent. I think it's really important to measure impact. So you may have a strategy, but then you're not measuring what the impact of what you're doing is. But if you do measure the impact, that's a way to sell it. Because, if you start off with some part of your strategy and you're measuring a positive impact, you can use that, to sell the next part and the next part. And it's sort of like a virtuous circle. And, of course, you have to make sure to govern what you're modernizing. I think a lot of our best practices reports are about modernizing. Like I just wrote a best practices report that was published in the second quarter that was about modernizing the organization to support data and analytics. Jim Kobielus, who's another one of our analysts, wrote about modernizing the data ops and ML ops pipeline. We together wrote a best practices report on unifying the data warehouse and the data lake. So a lot of our best practices reports are on our website. Just go to tdwi.org, go under research and resources, and you'll see all kinds of reports there. But one of those types are best practices reports. So you could just go there and, download it for yourself. There's just so much information there.
There absolutely is. Fern, thank you so much for your time. I know that we could go on and on about this topic, but I look forward to having you on this podcast again shortly. It's really a pleasure to break in the very new podcast, Speaking of Data, with you, Fern. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
To subscribe to the Speaking of Data podcast, or to learn more about TDWI's research and training on all things data management and analytics, visit tdwi.org or click the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.